Ecofictologists, welcome back to my channel and welcome to another episode of Spells and Specialists, the show where we use magic and stories to teach technical topics and communicate science. Welcome again to my co-host Clark.
Hello.
Yeah, we're super excited to be here for another episode.
Yep.
And we're welcoming one of Clark's friends, I believe. This is Max Farmer, and he is a vet. And yeah, I'll just leave it up to you to introduce yourself because that is the extent of what I know about you just now.
Yeah, hi. My name is Max Farmer. I am a veterinarian. My last name is Farmer, but don't let that fool you. I don't do farm animals. I just do mostly dog and cats. I do some guinea pigs and some little pocket pets every once in a while. But yeah, I'm a classic small animal practitioner over in the US here in the great white north of Wisconsin. Yes, and because of that, I also love cheese because I'm up here. I have to.
It's a
And
requirement.
yes, it's a requirement. And when I don't do vet work, like that's my secret identity. When I'm at nighttime, I will masquerade as attempting to be an author. So I've written some lit RPG stuff under the name Maxwell Farmer. So if you want to check that out, you can. And that's actually how I met Clark.
Yep. Met at 20 books to 50K in Vegas. So
Yep,
and we're nerding out about lit RPG stuff. So yeah.
exactly.
I think I missed this little tidbit of information at some point. I was not aware. What is your lit RPG about that you write?
Ironic actually. I wrote a trilogy called Dr. Druid, and it is about a veterinarian portal fantasy lit RPG. And so he uses his animal companions to fight and stuff. And so, yes, it's kind of even a little Pokemon stuff like that. And there's a lot of little nerdy
Oh,
references in there that you can check it out. So yeah, it's by the Great Mountain Dale Press. They were kind enough to publish me, and so yes, feel free to go check it out.
I will 100% do that. That sounds
Awesome.
wonderful.
The first book is Virgil's Pact.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna do that. I'm super into like my cozy fantasy at the moment, and that sounds cozy to me.
Maybe
I
To a
don't know if
degree.
it'll
we'll
turn out
see.
to be
I mean,
cozy, but
it's
like a
it's I
vet and
wouldn't
his
I
animal
would
friends.
that's the nice part. It starts off, you got to get through the conflict and stuff first, and then it does build up with his animal companionship.
Yep.
Excellent. That sounds great. Well, we're here today to learn lots and lots of cool stuff from you about what you do in your
Yeah.
job as a vet.
Mhm.
And the point of this session, A, is just for us to nerd out about what you do.
Yeah.
And keeping in mind, though, that the goal of the whole episode is to build a magic system out of it and
Totally.
to brainstorm a story, to communicate all the cool stuff that you do. So as we're going along, maybe keep in mind that at the end, we're going to ask you for 3 take-home messages that you'd like the audience to retain.
Yep. I've
And
actually I've
that,
watched the podcast too, and I've written them down. I'm prepped. I am
Oh, he's
ready.
good to go.
wow, he's so prepared. I don't even have to do the intro. It's great. Well, okay, we can just jump right in.
So yeah, so you are a doctor of veterinary medicine.
Mhm.
I guess we generally start with like, what does that mean? I mean, we probably have a vague idea at least, but more
Yeah.
specifically, what does that entail?
Yeah, so for sure, it's a very broad spectrum in that kind of way of like, just how an MD can practice a lot of different medicine as well. And so for me in particular, what that means is um, examining dogs and cats for the most part and um, seeing what ails them, whether that is physically or even on cases psychologically, trying to make sure that they are healthy and meet a certain criteria that we like to look for, and help correct any kind of illnesses or injuries and the like that we see, whether that is um, some sort of like a metabolic disease, for example, or if, like the classic, like broken leg. and what those things are to help out, and yeah, make them feel better and make the owners and the animals a lot less stressed.
Okay, so you had mentioned that you are mostly just a general small animal vet,
Yep.
and I know there's lots and lots of
Oh yeah.
specializations within MD. What are some of the specializations within DVM?
Yeah, yeah, DVM, you got it. And so a lot of the things you see just the same with human practitioners. So we have internists, dermatologists, ophthalmologists, gastroenterologist. Yeah, that gastroenterology falls under internal medicine, nutritionists, oncology. Like, I mean, every system of the body, general, like special surgeons, uh, really for almost for any kind of system you can imagine there's a specialty. We had a meeting just with a veterinary dentist and did some training this last week, actually. So yeah, you can almost break into like the main kind of body parts and find a specialist for sure. Cardiology is another example in that way. So literally almost going through the organs, and you can almost find a typical kind of specialty. And internist does typically get a broad category for sure. But there's even neurology, and they are super smart people, a lot smarter than I am. And so, yes, like quite literally doing brain surgery or spinal surgery on pets. And it's fascinating, and it's very nuanced and complex. And I appreciate those people. I am not that person.
Okay. I imagine there are some fields that don't really carry over. At least I hope they don't carry over. Like cosmetic surgery. Hopefully that's not a thing in the veterinary world.
The only thing I can think of in particular is more of there are some things with uh there is some cosmetic stuff in terms of usually more for like show dogs.
Mm,
But whether that be tail docking or ear crop sort of things, there are some of those. There's no just like, hey, my dog's face looks fat, I want to take this off. I don't feel that's necessary. Now, yeah,
It's
if we have
not.
like, yeah,
You're
yeah,
correct.
yeah,
It is
yeah, yeah.
not.
And but there are definitely times like, and like, oh, hey, this is like I had a like, hey, this dog has a mass over on its leg and it's bothering it, I'd like to get that removed. And it's like, yeah, totally. I mean, that
right.
you could label that under cosmetic if you want to, but there are medical needs as well in that particular regard.
Okay. I don't know. What questions do you have, Lois?
Yeah, I know.
It's
There's
not as
just so
nuanced of a
much.
field that you like never heard of it before in that kind of way.
Yeah. Sometimes when I talk to the few vets that I know, they will, or even doctors in general
Mhm.
that study any kind of medicine, they will, they might work in a very broad field, but they do have an interest, like
Yeah,
a passion field. What would
totally.
be the field that where you're like, I really would just love to know more about that? Or if a case comes into your practice, you're just like, oh, this is I want to help the animal, but also this is like
Yeah.
academically interesting to
Yeah,
me.
oh, for sure. No, that's a very good question. I'd say there's one field that's always been a passion project. I did actually consider going into residency and specializing. Nutrition, actually. I love to talk about dog and cat food. It may sound really boring, but
Okay.
I have gained a passion for that, and I can talk about that all day. And so, I genuinely did consider going into residency for that. Um, so that is I love talking about that kind of stuff. Sometimes some people have some very strong opinions one way or another about that. But I really love that. And then just recently with all the extra training and stuff, I've actually really enjoyed dentistry. It's kind of silly maybe sounding, but it's actually a very important field. And it's definitely, growing in understanding and those kinds of things. Like, people are appreciating those things a lot more now. And it's just tied in like to a lot of your general health too, for your pets. And so it's, if you like, there are some people that want to do like, they want to save all their animals' teeth, and like they were like, hey, I don't want them to take out this tooth. I'd like to do uh, do so, like a root canal or something like that. That's more of a veterinary dentist kind of specialty in that kind of way. But yeah, like teeth extractions, those kinds of things. Doing some surgery there and making sure everything looks nice and getting them meds, help them feel better, because like we see a lot of like super diseased teeth, and like mouth can be rotten. So those are the two fields I've definitely found a lot more just enjoyment in, just because I'm like, oh, this is so cool. And so yes, nutrition, it's kind of a weird one in that way. That's not a very popular field. But
so useful. I mean,
oh,
you
for
would be
sure.
the person that I could take to the pet shop when I'm confronted by the huge wall of different types of pet
Oh
food,
yeah,
and I have no idea what I'm looking at. Why is
sure,
this one more expensive than this one? And they look
exactly.
exactly the same. This
Oh
one
yeah,
is for sensitive stomachs. That one is for old dogs and young dogs and all of these things. And
totally.
it honestly, it is overwhelming. There are
Oh,
so
for
many
sure.
brands, and I have
Yeah,
no idea.
it is.
Something that we started getting into was insect protein
Yeah.
in the dog food.
Yep.
Really, in
Um,
the dog food. Okay.
yeah,
Yep.
because we started using insect protein dog food, which
Yeah.
obviously is more expensive, but it was something that, there's that you hope that the meat that is in dog food, even though you want it to be high quality so that it's healthy and it's nutritious for them,
Yeah.
you also hope that, you would use a lot of the stuff that we don't use for our own
Hmm.
consumption so that it reduces the waste of any kind
Yeah.
of meat industry.
Yeah.
Whether that's true or not, I don't know. Maybe
You
you
know,
have
yeah. So I will say, as a kind of a caveat, I'm not a board nutritionist, so they definitely know a lot more about those things than I do in the terms of the specifics. But no, it could be a very well managed sort of thing. Now, there's a lot of, and this could be a complete conversation in itself. There's a lot of misinformation and a lot of things that are out there. Like, oh yeah, they use roadkill and do all that. It's like, no, there's the FDA guidelines and stuff like
yeah.
that. Um, and so I have to kind of put that little bit of a plug in there. But no, that's the cricket. I've actually read about that, believe it or not. And the concept is like a lot of people like talk about like, well, and it's a lot of dogs have allergies, like food allergies, and it's to protein in particular. It's to the molecular size of the protein. So when you have bigger molecules of protein, that is a more likely to be allergic protein based.
Hmm.
And so sometimes when you're introducing what you call novel based protein, so new protein they've never experienced before, you're hopefully going to reduce the risk of allergic reactions in those kinds of ways. There is a really cool kind of science called with hypoallergenic food in particular, where they actually break down the molecules. And so hydrolyzed is the term where they actually break down the protein, where it literally is so small that they can't. And I'm like, I don't know how you made the machine to break down every single bit of protein, but credit to you. And so that is, yeah, so like I've definitely heard that, and that's an interesting one for sure when looking for a novel based protein.
So is that called hydrolyzed food, hydrolyzed protein? What's the...
Yeah, I mean, really, you could type hydrolyzed dog food and it could
Okay.
come up.
Okay.
And so yes, it's really cool science that people have come up with.
Okay.
Yeah.
So with the nutrition and the dentistry, like what is it that interests you there? Like what is it that
Yeah,
makes you excited?
I think in a way that, you've probably heard the term like food is medicine, um, and how it can make a huge difference in pets' lives, as well as like it can be both easier and harder sometimes to manage pets' food, just because like there are some animals that are a lot more picky than others. But it's like, hey, this dog has kidney disease. With kidney disease, you have to, the big thing in particular is to manage the phosphorus, which is linked to the protein. And so you want to have high quality protein that has less phosphorus in it to be less damaging. They still need protein. And so it's trying to find the right balance. So they have like this specific kidney food that they can still get that protein, but they're not getting as much phosphorus, and that can help them feel better and live longer. And it can make a huge difference. So a lot of ways, instead of having to use medication for certain things, it can make a big difference. Or a common thing I see is pancreatitis. Pancreatitis is inflammation of the pancreas. Pancreas helps with the digestion and breakdown of fat. And getting on a low fat food can make a huge difference. Their gut can feel better. They can live just a lot more comfortable life. And so it can just, a lot of those things can make a huge difference, and people don't always realize that. And that's what I'm here to educate about that. So it's super cool. I like all that. I like the science behind it. So yes, that's a big reason in particular why that's a passion project. And then also with dentistry, just again, it's a subtle thing, and animals are so good about hiding their discomfort. Like I've seen it, like I've seen like countless times, like a dog has a broken tooth. And they're like, well, they're eating fine. They're doing great. I'm like, well, this tooth is really bad. Like I can see the pulp. It shouldn't be there. And they're like, they're like, oh, they're eating fine. And I'm like, they may be eating totally fine, but I'm going to tell you this is uncomfortable. And I can like, stimulate them to make it uncomfortable, or to show like, hey, like, see this, like it's a reactive kind of thing, not trying to invoke pain, but just to show. So, and then like, then it can be like a miracle kind of thing, like, hey, get rid of all these diseased teeth. And like, they're like a brand new dog. And like, they're just happy and moving around. I'm like, yeah, it's had like a rotten or broken tooth in there for months. So it's just some of the small things that can make actually a really big difference, which is just really exciting to see. It's one of the most rewarding feelings, seeing a patient improve under your care. Just
Okay.
warms my day.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I have another really close friend who's a vet, and
Mhm.
that's something she had told us with the pancreatitis, with the fatty foods. That's
Yeah.
what she told us, is that Thanksgiving is the worst time of year for at least for them
Woo!
in their clinic, because
It's bad.
people will give their dogs like turkey
Oh,
skin and high
Mhm.
fat stuff, which will lead to temporary pancreatitis,
Yep. Yep.
which, depending on how bad it is, can kill the dog.
Oh, for sure. It can lead to a bad thing. And then one thing too, and it's what this is also a really cool fact about veterinary medicine, is that every like every breed of like cat and dog has stuff they're specifically prone to, in particular. And so this is a really kind of cool thing. Like, so I'll use schnauzers. Schnauzers have a condition called hyperlipidemia, which means they have an higher than normal fat content in their blood, just naturally. That makes them really prone to pancreatitis. And so that's just like some things that we know about. Cavalier King Charles Spaniels, really sweet dogs, prone to having heart issues. That's just there. It's almost kind of a joke sometimes about like how much they're going to be prone to. They're super sweet dogs. I love them, but they are just known for that. And so that's also something that helps us to kind of keep aware of. Like, hey, Cavalier puppy coming in. Let's talk about risk for heart disease coming up in the future at some point. Um, and so those things as well. That's different than I know with. I mean, to a degree, there are like people that like I don't know about like all the human medicine aspect, but I imagine there's like, hey, this person, their ancestors are from, like maybe the first generation, or something. They're from this certain region and they're known to have like a higher prevalence for X disease. But that's a really kind of cool way that we can kind of gauge those as well. Like just knowing the certain breed and what they're prone to can help us to be more aware, and preparatory of things, of potential risk in the future.
because
Okay.
that's very common, isn't it? That like we've bred dogs and cats to
Mhm.
look a certain way or to perform a certain
Yep.
action, to
Yes.
hunt a certain animal or to go down the hole or to
Mhm.
fit in your handbag or whatever. And that always has knock-on effects, right?
Yes. Oh,
Health-wise.
yes.
The Great Danes, they're
Mhm.
huge and we've bred them to be huge,
Mhm.
but they don't live as long because they get all of these it's difficult for the body to maintain that
Yeah.
size.
The general. Oh, go ahead.
No, no, go jump in.
Yeah, the general rule of thumb is and I mean, there's always fluctuations, just like every human's different, every dog is different, but um, the general rule of thumb is the bigger the dog, the shorter the life. That's just the general rule of thumb. Now, granted, have there been like 15, 16-year-old Labradors? Totally. That's the exception, not the
Yeah.
standard. Um,
Unless it's a pug and it can't breathe or it has eye issues or something, because we bred it to look like it's run into a wall.
yeah. There are some. There are definitely some. I've seen some pugs that are a lot worse than others, and I'm like, whew, that's rough. Um, and so yeah, that's a very, very valid point. And so yeah, there's plenty of dogs and dog breeds that have been bred a certain way, as you said, very well put, that has made them more at risk for certain diseases, for sure.
And I actually just recently learned that with the bigger breeds, you actually want to wait a fairly long time before you let them start doing high impact activities with like full running. Like with Great
Yeah,
Danes, apparently you don't want them to do their full sprints until they're what, like a year?
and it's this is kind of sometimes where you get a little bit of like some fluctuation in those kinds of things. Because as you know, Clark, I have a Great Dane.
Yes.
And so in that particular way, it's trying to maintain those things. It's trying to have a healthy balance in that way
Right.
because you're usually not done fully growing until they're about 2 in that way. And so, it may just be like, usually it's like a big spike and then it kind of just slowly afterward. But it's just trying to maintain that. Like, I definitely let my dog run around. I'm not saying, like we went on marathons or anything like that for sure. But it's just trying to kind of, like with anything typically with health, it's like moderation, right? And so it's just trying to kind of keep an eye on that. Because they're really growing for a long time. And so sometimes that can put them more at risk than others for certain things.
So I want to hear more about nutrition stuff. Like,
Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
what are some of the main things to watch out for? Like,
Yeah.
there's some stuff. Okay, actually, so here's a more specific question.
Sure.
Dogs shouldn't have garlic or onions or grape skin. Grape skin is
Good.
really, really bad, but garlic and onions as well. So I have always wondered why so many dog food have garlic and onion powder listed in the ingredients.
Good question. Good question. So I can't speak for there's any individual company specific logic, but the logic behind I talked to somebody about this once is like having a large amount at once or like a kind of a noticeable small amount over a period of time in that kind of way. So sometimes when they have like a little bit in that kind of way, it's not necessarily going to be as impactful or like harmful as like truly warned about. Grapes is a different conversation entirely for sure. One grape, like it's really interesting because there's no way to predict it, but like there's some dogs that can eat a whole bundle of grapes and be absolutely fine, and then there can be one dog that eats one grape and then die. And so it's like don't risk it, just don't do
Yeah,
it.
no grapes.
Yeah. And
No
so
grapes.
No
yes, no
grapes.
grapes. And so it that way, but that is a very good question in that particular regard. But I know that they've likely done a lot of research in particular about like if there's truly any harmful effects of just using a powder versus, like actual like garlic cloves and actual like chunks of onion versus in that way. But yeah, it can be like a small noticeable amount over time or like large amount kind of more quickly that you can actually see some of that.
Yeah,
Um,
I didn't know if maybe small amounts had some actual medical benefits, or I guess the assumption I had always made was that it was more of a psychological tactic that a lot of dog food seems to do, of they put stuff in there that we think is good so that we will get it for our dogs because we want our dogs to have good food. That's
oh,
that's part of what I
that is
assumed.
there is a huge push for that for sure. And advertising for dog food has gotten really good. Sometimes, unfortunately, it capitalizes on misinformation or just a lack thereof. And I'm not talking about any certain company or anything like that, but there's a lot of good advertising out there. And some you have to be a little bit more nuanced. I think it's even just like with human food though, like you read it like, oh, 50% less fat, but then you'd see like they add extra sodium, they add extra salt, and you just, it's a very, you have to know the game. Otherwise, you're going to get fooled in that particular regard. There was a big push probably about 7 years ago, maybe, for like grain free. Grain free used to be all the rage. Probably saw it on TV all the time. So advertised, and there are some certain benefits in terms of grain free, but that was a good example of kind of how sometimes it can go bad. Uh, Back in 2018, it really kind of showed up. There was a thing called dilated cardiomyopathy. Heart gets stretched too thin like a water balloon, but they found it was associated with like these 16 different brands of grain-free dog food, and they don't know exactly why. I don't know if they ever actually found the exact correlation as to why there was this kind of thing, but they did find a link between them. And I even had a couple patients like that. And so it's one of those things you always kind of be a little bit aware of in those kinds of ways. Because also like if the sentiment is good, like, oh, feed the wolf inside or something, or something like that. And yes, if going back to ancestry, yes, dogs came from wolves in those ways. And there's a little bit of argument that this is a cool little tidbit fact that there's some wondering. I don't know if they ever confirmed that Chihuahuas actually may have come from fennec foxes in Mexico.
Really?
So they maybe, I don't know, but don't quote me on that. But that's a little fun little fact. And
Watch him go down a rabbit hole now.
Probably.
somebody's gonna like investigate this now afterward. But dogs are not wild animals, and their physiology and their gut health and all that is not that of a wild animal, and that's always kind of a big thing to know. And so we do not need to feed them like a wild animal in that particular way. And so yes, there are still certain facts and things to take from that for sure and use. But I'm just of the camp that like you don't need to go hunt a deer and then feed that to your dog. You don't need to do that. And so
that does lead to a very interesting point in world building that is, I think, just valuable to know, and that is the difference between tamed animals and domesticated animals.
mhm.
So when you're dealing with that in your world building, those are two different
Yeah.
things.
Mhm.
So just in our world, we
Yeah.
have the mostly domesticated house cat. Not fully, but mostly domesticated house cat.
They'll never be fully.
Compared to any other cat, they're
They would
domesticated.
argue.
But you can have tamed lions, but we do not have any domesticated lions.
Yes.
And that's a really big thing when you're looking at your world building, is whether they were able to truly domesticate certain breeds of animals, because that runs into some very interesting stuff. If you want to read more about it, Guns, Germs, and Steel has a whole chapter on that, and it just reframed some things of if you can't contain them, and if the personality isn't right, then you're just not going to be able to domesticate them. And it's fun stuff to think about, is if you want to do that, how were they able to domesticate them? And if they can't, what is that change? Because then you might have an elite squad of scouts or something where part of their rite of passage is they have to tame these specific wild animals because they can't be domesticated. But
Mhm.
you want wyvern riders or something like that. That's part of the thing, is you have to go tame one, and if you can't tame one, you don't get to be a wyvern rider, or something like that.
Yeah.
There's lots of fun stuff you can do with that.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, my brain just skipped to part 4 of this episode, and I
As
now
usually
see like
happens.
a scout that tames one because it has pancreatitis and he knows what to feed it. So we're gonna come back to that.
Yeah, it's gonna be like the Snorlax wyvern with pancreatitis going on.
Ugh.
I am curious, what are some of the, getting ahead of myself. So from what you've been talking about, it sounds like, whether, I don't know whether this is your intent or not, but it sounds
Yeah.
like one of the things you're probably trying to achieve here, if I'm reading this right,
Mhm.
is wanting to serve as a form of education about this importance, and maybe even counter some of the misinformation that is out there. Am
Yeah.
I?
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
That's a huge part of what I wanted to do. It was my two big things were to educate and inform. And so yes, I mean, like nutrition is like it's a big thing. It's huge. People don't always value that. And it can make a huge difference in a pet's life. In that kind of way. I mean, even like, countering like obesity in pets and things like that. Like there's a statistic. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it's like 90% of pets are overweight, 80% of owners think their pets are fine, and then and something like that, like only 50% of vets are fooled or something. Like there's some weird kind of statistic, or like it's but yes, it's there. Again, numbers I don't have exactly, but yes, like just an example, there's a lot of overweight pets. My other dog, not my Dane, he's a chunky monkey right now. He likes to eat all the baby's food. So, well, then that's
And which statistic do you fall under? Are you fooled or do you think he's fine?
At first I was wondering, I'm like, because like one thing that gets people, and I think just with anything, is small changes over time you don't notice in anything, right? If like the color of the siding of a house fades slowly over time, if you're there for 10 years, you're not going to notice. But like if you look at a picture from the beginning, you're like, oh my gosh, look how different this looks. And so that was the case with my dog. And now I admit it. I admit my other dog, he needs to lose weight. I bought him a weight loss food. So we're gonna get started on that. But it's one of those things, just like over time, kind of. And then like my mom, I even told my mom that because he gained some weight, and my mom's like, yeah, I thought he was looking a little bit more fluffy last time I saw him. And it's like, well, that makes sense. She doesn't see him that often. So,
And what is it about the food that makes it a weight loss food?
yeah, good question. Higher fiber typically is one of the big components for sure, to feel more full but have less calories in that kind of way. Um, every diet can be a little bit different in that kind of way, whether it's ingredient choices in that way. But I would say a pretty good tenet is fiber content, and just kind of having less calories per cup as well. Um, those are some of the big things. There's probably some people that have came up with certain food elements that will be like, hey, yeah, we use this, and it helps to stimulate. Well, I know there's like one food that like it helps to like stimulate their metabolism more, which is a really cool sort of thing. I don't know how, but I just know it does. So those are some aspects that can be beneficial for sure.
Okay.
So sorry to jump in, but I wanted to quickly actually go back to something we talked about before, in the context of like stray animals.
Okay. Yeah.
Because sometimes, you have the whole list of, well, dogs shouldn't eat this and cats shouldn't eat this.
Yeah.
But then you have strays that live on the street
Yep.
in some countries,
Mhm.
and they're going to eat anything that they find.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Oh yeah.
And so sometimes like this whole hype of like, well, one grape and it's gonna like kill your dog.
Mhm.
And you're like, is there any way that on the street there was no remnant of a grape anywhere? Or
Yeah.
like, did
No,
it
good
have
question.
chocolate? It would have eaten chocolate if it came across chocolate, or chicken
Yeah.
bones, or garlic.
Mhm.
Definitely garlic and
Yeah.
onion and like leftovers that had been left out and things. So
Yeah.
do street animals just have like a higher, like a better immune system? Is it
Good
about
question.
immunity or immune systems, or
there is admittedly there's a genetic component in that kind of way, and likely multi-generational like street dogs. Like, hey, I'm a street dog. My mom was a street dog. My great grandpappy was a street dog. Like if likely in that kind of way, if there's been kind of a multi-generational, I would assume there's a little bit of kind of like you could think of Darwinism sort of the way, like there's kind of a bit of like an adapted sort of thing. I'm not saying that they just go around eating a bunch of grapes necessarily. But that they may, because I said like there are some dogs that can eat a bunch of grapes and they'll be fine, and there's some dogs that eat one grape and then dead. And it's like, well, probably if those two dogs went on the street and they both happen to wound up eating a grape, one's probably going to die, and the other one's going to pass on its genetics. And so, you know, there are some dogs that are just more hardier than others for sure. Like my other dog, my chunky monkey, he can eat a lot of things and be totally fine. My Dane, I love her. I call her a lovable lemon. It's great she has a veterinarian as a dad. But I feel like if I gave her something that she didn't want to eat, it could be just like not good and not good for my carpet. And so it's just trying to find those things. But yeah, I think there is a bit of adapt to, like just kind of a historical kind of thing. But I mean, as well, I will say, is a trade-off. You see a lot of street dogs that have a lot of serious diseases like mange and those things. So it's a bit of a trade-off in that way. But yeah, I think.
Still there?
Yeah.
I think we lost you at the end of
Yeah,
that
you said
sentence.
I think.
Okay.
And
I think, and then you stopped.
Just cliffhanger. No,
Yeah.
it depends on the dog. That's the big thing.
Okay.
Okay. So mange is something that you can control or get rid of with food rather than medication?
No, mange is one of those ones you definitely need medication in that kind of way, for sure, because it's from a parasite.
Yeah.
And so you need some help. I mean, afterward, just trying to like improve coat quality and those things like that, and helping things to get back, like nutrition can make a big difference. But that's one of those ones that that one is not going to help, in my personal experience.
Okay. So what is some of the What are some of the pieces of misinformation that are common out there that you wish you could root out? And
Ooh, oh man, there's a lot.
Take a drink of wine and then answer. Oh no, you're not in my time zones. Never mind.
So, I would say that's the kind of the first one I already kind of hit on is like dogs are not wolves, cats are not lions. We love them. They're our little fur babies. I call them that. But that is a big thing in particular. And so feeding as such isn't a necessary sort of thing and isn't always the wisest choice either. Now, again, there are, if you get like an 18-year-old cat that won't eat anything but pieces of steak, at the end of the day, I want that cat to eat something. And so it's like, like you always have to have that trade-off. There's always nuances. The other, see here, gosh, there can be plenty about things in particular. Man. Now, this one actually I wasn't prepped for, like all the kind of misinformation sort of thing, but there is a
I guess
lot, and
just
sometimes
start listing some of the most common ones you run into when you're talking with pet owners.
Totally. Spaying and neutering, I think that's a big thing. Some people are really against it. I understand, but I think a lot of people don't realize the increased risk of cancer and hormonal issues linked to that. Yes, it does. When you spay or neuter a dog, their metabolism typically gets lower over time. So even if they're hyper, they're not necessarily burning off calories as readily. But I like to, especially in cases of spays, every heat cycle increases the risk of mammary cancer up to about 25%. So like if you have a 12-year-old female intact cat, probably about a 1 in 4 chance that it can get mammary cancer at some point in its life. Compared to if it was spayed at the very beginning, the chances is much less lower. I don't know the specific number, but it's extremely low compared to 25%. And so some people are like, oh, I'm never going to spay or neuter. And I'm like, at the end of the day, that's fine. That's your choice. You just have to understand there's risk in that kind of way. And yeah. And another thing I'd say, there are plenty of veterinarians that make a lot of money. But people are like, oh, you're a veterinarian in it for the money. And it's like, if I was in it for the money, I would have been a human doctor. They make a lot more. And so it's
and school is not as stressful.
Can be, yes. We have to learn multiple body systems. They only have to learn one.
Yeah.
But granted, they have to work with people. You know what this is?
That is a trade-off.
That is a trade-off for sure. But that is one in particular, I'd say. Dogs as well. This is kind of a fun one. Dogs and cats don't have self-image issues. At least most dogs and cats don't have self-image issues. And so sometimes some people are reluctant to do like a salvage procedure, like, hey, your dog has glaucoma and the eye drops are not helping and it's really bad and has loss of vision. We have like permanent damage and those kinds of things. And some people are hesitant, like, oh, I don't want to take out the eye. And it's like, they don't have self-image issues. They could have one eye, no teeth, 3 legs, could be completely deaf, and they're living the dream. In that way, it's a big, so that's a big one. And then I'd say what we also talked about earlier is that they don't exhibit pain always like we do. Dogs and cats are a lot more tough than people. And that was kind of what I talked about like earlier, like with the dental disease and stuff like that. Like, hey, they have a painful broken tooth. Like, well, they're eating their food just fine and they're not making a sound. And I'm like, I get it. I would be freaking out if I did. But they just don't exhibit that. And so a lot of times, and this is what I like to praise owners for, when they know it's just subtle things. I'd say cats even more than dogs. Cats are a lot more survivors than dogs. And that way they just, it's like little things like, hey, they're just hiding a little more. They're not as active as they used to be. Sometimes some of those things can be just little warning signs. So they're just a lot more tough, and signs, I think that's a really big bit of misinformation. The signs of pain can be very subtle and sometimes unrecognized. Another bit of information, again, kind of what we talked about, like with nutrition stuff, like, again, people aren't using roadkill for their dog food unless you're getting it from like the back of some guy's van, I guess. But I would say there's some serious misinformation about that out there. And yeah, those are some key aspects for sure, that I think can hopefully help people out.
Okay. I don't know. Do you have other questions, Lovis?
Well, I'm just thinking, I mean, those are kind of take-home messages in and of themselves, aren't they?
Yeah. I do still have some more take home, like
Oh,
my
excellent. Well, then my
take-home.
question is what, of everything that we've talked about, what would
Yeah.
be the three take-home messages
Yeah.
that you would like people to remember?
Totally. So in regards to veterinary medicine, and we could talk more about this because I really didn't get too much into this. Um, I like to say animals are a part of your family. Like they're like my little fur babies in that way. They're very intelligent, but they're not people. And I think unfortunately, sometimes they get treated as people, and that can lead to problems. Um, Psychologically, they are not people. Physiologically, they are not people. They do not have to eat people food, as an example, and they should not always be treated as such. A big thing. I have a 10-month-old son, and it was funny. I had to train myself to treat him differently than I would a puppy, because he's our first, and it's this kind of way. Like a big thing I like to tell people in particular. Um, Say you have a new puppy, and you have somebody come and visit, and the puppy starts to like hide and get like real scared and get like kind of like fear aggressive a little bit, like "Arr." In that way. A lot of people, well intentioned, it's from a loving heart, but a lot of people well intentioned, be like, oh, it's okay, and try to soothe and pet. I tell people don't do that, because for a human, that's great. You're trying to soothe, and that's what my wife was telling me. Like, you can soothe our baby, and I'm like, oh yeah, and I'm like holding him, and I'm trying to calm, but like I was just like, I had to kind of rewire my thinking in that way. But you don't treat pets like people, because they aren't people, and their brains are different. Because their psychology is different. You can't reason with a pet. Can have I have full on discussions with my pet, but it doesn't mean she understands. But so like what I tell people instead, for like those types of situations, instead of doing the soothing, because you're trying to send the message, it's okay, you don't need to worry. Dog brain takes that message, processes it as it's okay, you're doing the right thing, and it actually reinforces that behavior. Now that you know this, pay attention. Sometimes that's typically like a lot of little dogs, like somebody's holding a little dog and they're like, "Arr!" It's like, hey, it's okay, and the dog doesn't change at all, and you're like, it's like, I understand now, I understand what you're saying. And so what I tell people is having like a sharp redirect in those particular times. So like kind of a stimulus, like saying their name, then a loud noise, or like my one dog's deaf, so you can yell at her all you want. It doesn't make a difference. So I use a little spray water bottle, and she's like, "Boo," and
That is,
then kind of
I was
oh
just
yeah,
gonna say that's a good reminder because we we've been looking at getting a second dog, and we just brought a dog home for a trial week to see how it
yeah,
works.
yeah,
And she has been growling at our original dog a little bit when he gets up in her face. I need to
yeah,
make sure that we aren't doing that. We've really been trying to focus on um, the positive reinforcement of when he approaches and she doesn't react.
yes, good,
So like if he gets close and she's okay and not snarling, we tell her she's a good girl and we try and give her a treat.
yes,
But I definitely need to remember that and make sure that I'm not telling her she's a good girl if she had been snarling.
yes,
Um,
yes,
so
because
so
that can
with
send
that
mixed
though, is it
messages.
is it okay to do that if you're getting them to step down? So like if
Good
she's
question.
starting to twitch her lip but she hasn't barked yet or snarled at him yet, is it okay for me to be like, that's okay, barking no, like that?
Yeah, it just kind of depends on what you feel comfortable with. Like, so our one dog, our Dane, like just this morning, like we have a I have a word or kind of a phrase that I use with him, and the phrase I use is "be good," because the one Dane just wants to be all up in his face, and he's kind of like a cat. He's kind of like, just let me do my thing, you just stay over there. And she's like, hey, best friend, and he'll be like, "Mm." And he'll try to growl to say like, hey, but you can't hear him. And so I'm like, be good, and then he'll stop, and I'll be like, okay, good, in that kind of way. So it's really kind of having a sharp kind of thing. And then so if you feel comfortable, like if we show lip but we don't do anything else, then that's okay. But if you don't feel as comfortable with that, then be like, yeah, using a phrase like, hey, be good. And then like when they kind of understand that, whatever it works, like, hey,
Okay.
no, hey, stop.
Get their
Um,
attention and then once they have stopped doing it, then
yes,
okay.
yes. exactly. Because you just want to, because they're in
Good
this like
reminder.
hyperfixation. Yeah, because they're in this hyperfixation spiral. You can't reason through it with them. So you just have to take them out of it with some sort of redirect. And so sometimes I say, yeah, you can use treats, but don't always do that because they're too smart sometimes. And they'll be like, hey, if I growl, that means I get a treat. And
Yeah.
so it's just trying to use those kinds of ways. But that's a really big thing in particular. So they aren't people. Don't treat them as people. They are members of our family, though.
So
It's like,
I don't know. It's making me smile because you say they're not people, but I do find more and more that people are a lot like animals and dogs. So that whole thing of like snapping their attention,
yeah.
there's a lot of that in psychotherapy and cognitive behavioral therapy, where it
Hmm.
is just like you're fixated and sometimes you just need something to sharply drag your attention to something
Hmm.
else, which is
Yep.
exactly what you're doing with the dog.
That's funny.
I'm sure
Yeah.
there's some animalistic, like going back to base
Your
instincts
lizard
in those
brain. Yeah.
Yeah,
situations.
if only it
Yeah.
was as easy as having somebody just snap their fingers at me to get me out of an anxiety circle. If
Yeah.
only it
That'd
was
be
that
nice.
easy.
Yeah.
But
If only. Um, yeah. Just give me a peanut butter cookie and I'll be all right. Uh, so that's a big thing. I'd say like another key point is that nutrition is huge, extremely important. And while they aren't people, they also aren't wild animals. They are domesticated animals, or mostly domesticated animals in the ways of cats, as we've discussed. And so, kind of understanding that is a big thing. I'd say the third thing, because I feel being a veterinarian is a very popular thing for kids. Like a lot of people, like I hear a lot of parents like, "Hey, Sally over here wants to be a vet one day," which is great and it's admirable. Um, people don't realize this. I didn't realize this. Veterinary medicine is actually a people job. A lot of people are like, hey, I really like animals, but I don't like people. And it's like, oh, maybe you should go work in like as a wildlife, there's like a forester or something out there, just like away from everybody. This is very much a people job because, and it's the same. I like my animals more than I like a lot of people. And it's, but, and there's also, and so, because there's an owner attached to that animal. And there's a phrase also in veterinary medicine: not every pet owner is a crazy person, but every crazy person owns a pet. Uh, and uh, and so you deal with some unique characters, for sure, but it is a people job. And so sometimes some people are like, I don't really like people, I like animals, so I want to be a vet. I'm like, you shouldn't be a vet. Or you should work in a lab or something. But even still, you have to appeal for grants and those kinds of things. So there's still people involved. So it is, and I'm happy that it's a people-based job. I'm able to help both animals and their people feel less worried and stressed because again, they are parts of the family. But it's intertwined, and that's I think a big key take-home factor is that I'm not just there. I'm in a way I'm not treating just an animal. I'm treating the person attached to the animal. Because I have to have a conversation and say like, hey, I recommend these diagnostics, and if they want to do that, if they can afford to do those things, in trying to kind of tailor that package. So that would be my third take-home point: is that it's intertwined. It is both human and animal things that you have to work with.
okay, so we've got animals are part of your family, but they aren't people.
Yes.
Nutrition is very important,
Hmm.
and veterinary medicine is actually a people job.
Yes.
Okay, okay.
I like those. I like those a lot.
I especially
Thank you.
like the first one because that's something that comes up a lot whenever we try to discuss crate training with even within our circle of friends.
Yeah.
Is there's a lot of people like, no, I don't want to lock him in a cage, or it's like, I'm not locking him in a cage. I'm giving him a den and a safe space.
Yeah. It's their
I,
bedroom. If you want to anthropomorphize it, you could say, hey, it's their bedroom.
You sent your kid to their room.
Yeah,
It's the
exactly.
same.
well, we try really hard.
Yeah.
It's even better if you can use it in purely positive fashion and not negative,
Yeah. Oh,
which
for
can
sure.
which can be really hard because when I'm frustrated, because Seamus is being really annoying and a
Yeah.
troublemaker, he does go in his
Mhm.
kennel, but we try and make sure that we get him in the kennel in a positive way, not while we're yelling at him. Like
Yeah.
I'll tell him to stop, and then I will pick him up, and it's all sweet words, be like, "You're being annoying, little here you go, go here, good, there you go, good boy," and then I can go calm down.
Yep.
But we run
So
into that a lot where people like, yeah, no, you don't do that to people because no, you can't do that to your kids.
If only.
But they are, like you said, they're not people. It's not a child baby. They
Yep,
have different wants and needs.
exactly.
So with those take-home messages and kind of thinking ahead to the story that we would brainstorm,
Yeah.
what audience do you think you would target? Would you target children or would you target adults?
Yeah.
Since it's about like correcting misinformation and things,
Yeah.
do you want to get in there early or do you want to correct what's already been absorbed?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is actually a big tenet of veterinary medicine, at least in how I do, is like it's a lot nicer and easier to prevent than having to treat things, you know? And so I'm not saying to get it, I just, I like to write things, or like, I like to write things I like to read in that way. So I would say like, teenagers, young adults would be kind of my thing, in their 20s and stuff, just because a lot of people, like they're in college. I mean, they get their first pet on their own. I mean, that was how it was for me. And so, just having that be kind of my target audience in that way, I think can be effective, because then kind of knowing those things early on, because I mean, there are people like, yeah, this is my fifth Labrador, and so, and a lot of times, I mean, it's just like with, I feel like any kind of thing, sometimes some people are so set in their ways in some form or fashion. And there are some clients like that. I'm just like, we're just going to agree to disagree. I'm going to tell you what I recommend, and you're going to do whatever you want to do, and that's fine. And so I think it's better to kind of target something earlier on.
Okay. So if we really
Perfect.
had a target audience, probably be people either in or coming out of college that are getting their
Mhm.
first pet on their own.
Yep.
Oh, right. Okay. I wrote down teens and YA. That's a different age group.
I mean, we can
Okay.
go either route. Like, do we want to
Yeah.
do?
No, I want to go more for what you said, Clark.
Okay.
Okay. Good. Good to know. Okay. Well, I think we're in a very good spot now to start
Awesome.
mining a lot of what we've talked about for our little seed crystal, which is Clark's domain, which is what we're going to
Mhm.
do in the next part. So I think
Awesome.
I'm going to call it here for part
Okay.
1 of this episode of Spells and Specialists with Max Farmer. And we're just going to do a quick tell people where they can find you, just in case they don't have time to listen to the second part of the episode right now, this
Yeah.
second, but you totally should because it's going to be great. But yeah, where can people find you and your book that you wrote?
Yeah. So I do have a website, maxwellfarmer.com. I need to do more editing of that because I haven't updated that in a while.
Always the
But there's a
case.
way you can, always the case, always the case. And so you can go over there, and there's a way you can message and reach out to me there. You can find my books on Amazon and Audible, and check that out. Yes, again, Dr. Druid. And if you have any questions, just want to even talk about nerdy stuff, let me know. I'm working on a Discord as well. So there's some other things as well. Maxwell Farmer, I think is just how it's named. I have to look up the specific name, but yeah, that's,
We can put
as you
it
can
in
see, that's very early on
the
in the
description below.
description. Yeah, there we go. But yeah, that's where you can find me in particular. I'm happy to discuss veterinary medicine stuff too, but I cannot treat or diagnose anything. So just if some people are going to be like, "Hey, what's this on my dog?"
Disclaimer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can't do that.
This is
And
not
so
an email vet service. That's not
yes,
what this
that is
is.
not the case. I'm happy to discuss things, but yes, do not expect veterinary service in that way. So yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, all that's left is for us to thank you very much for being here. And you're not free yet because we have a whole second part to do right now.
Awesome.
But thank you so much for being here. And thank you, Clark, as always, for joining me.
Yeah.
And the next part will be over on Clark's channel, Clark's YouTube channel, The Magic Engineer. So switch on over and you're going to find loads of really cool content there as well.
But first, make sure you like and subscribe to Ecofictology.
if you feel like it, And yeah, hang tight for part 2. So yes, we will see you in the next part, Ecofictologists.